and I'm going to welcome everyone to this talk today. My name is Marc-André Pigeon, Marc-André Pigeon. I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives. Now, our talk today, it focuses around a recent book by today's guest, Dr. Bernard Harcourt. And a core theme of the book, as I recall from reading it this summer, is thinking about the possibility of kind of centering notions of cooperation through cooperatives within our systems of politics, economics, and social norms. And it's one of the things that really stood out for me as part of that kind of wide-ranging discussion is Dr. Harcourt weaves in what was for me a bit of a novel and fascinating discussion about the criminal justice system and its propensity, this is my takeaway anyway, to reflect structures of power and hierarchy, and often effectively turning a blind eye to notions of real justice. And so from a Saskatchewan and Canadian context, I cannot help but reflect on our own criminal justice system and how it's been part of a system that's kind of institutionalized Indigenous people on a mass scale. And so today, as we customarily do, a land acknowledgement, I want to kind of contextualize that land acknowledgement by recognizing that this is our reality, both historically and ongoing. And as part of my reflection on that topic, I want to note that, as I often say, and as many of us do here in Saskatchewan, that we live in relationship with the peoples of Treaty 6 territory, the Cree, the Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and the Métis Nation. But it's important to recognize that, I think, in my perspective anyways, it's been a very one-sided relationship for a long time. And the criminal justice system has been part of that one-sided relationship, something that Harold Johnson, the late Indigenous lawyer, writer, trapper, Governor General Award winner, reminded us in his writings and his talks. So I want to acknowledge that also that however complicit we have all been, cooperatives have been in part of that history, there have been some hopeful stories too. We have our scholar, Isabel Finley, who's maybe on this call, I can't see her if she is, has worked with incarcerated Indigenous women to look at how participation in cooperatives can help them negotiate life in jail and ease transitions back into society. Myself and colleagues here at the JSGS and at the Canadian Centre for Study of Co-operatives are also working on research about what I consider a transformative social enterprise that's part of a cooperative that gives meaningful work to youth, most of them Indigenous, who've had some encounter with the criminal justice system. So my takeaway from that work and all the work that I've kind of digested is that when we invest in institutions of care instead of institutions of retribution, I think we can start making things right and live in genuine relationship. And so that's my form of land acknowledgement today. And on that hopeful note, I want to, my great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Bernard Harcourt. Dr. Harcourt is the Isidore and Seville Sulbacher, I hope I pronounced that right, professor of law and professor of political science at Columbia University. He is a distinguished critical theorist, legal advocate, and prolific author and editor. Author and editor of more than a dozen books, including most recently this book, A Cooperation, sorry, got zoomed out of here, Cooperation, a Political, Economic, and Social Theory, which offers, like I said, a blueprint for society based on cooperation. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this power of cooperatives to kind of help bring us into a better world and not kind of just think in terms of big P political electoral processes. And I think this book is really important and informative for our discussions, our troubles today. And I can say that with some confidence because as I said, I read Dr. Harcourt's book this summer, and I knew right away we had to invite him and have this conversation. And bring these ideas out of the books and bring them into our minds where they actually live in our actions, where we can do things with them. And so that's what these cooperative conversations are all about. We're here to play with ideas, take them, bring them into our being so they can make us and change us for the better. And so with that objective in mind, the way things are going to work today, as many of you will know, we're going to hear from Bernard for about 15 or 20 minutes. He and I will have a short conversation. Then we're going to have a 12 to 15 minute breakout discussion. We're going to regroup, and then we have a hard stop at 1 o'clock because we want to respect everyone's time, and our guest also has to leave promptly at that point. So that's how we're going to proceed. Bernard, I'm going to pass things to you in a moment. I just want to flag to people, we always lose a few folks when we do the breakout, but I want to just maybe emphasize how important these conversations are in these kind of more intimate settings, the breakout groups, this is where people can kind of get to know each other and build those networks that are going to bring us to help us address the problems that we all face as a society. So that's pretty much all I want to say, other than to note that if you do have technical difficulties, please look to Stan, send him a chat. Stan, if you can wave to folks, and he'll help you out with any technical difficulties. Bernard, that was a long-winded introduction, but now the floor is yours, and I'm really looking forward to your talk.
Well, thank you, Marc-André, and thank you, Stan, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here for this conversation. You know, Marc-André, the way you introduced the whole topic in the land grant, I think really resonated with me, in part because, I mean, believe it or not, this project on cooperation grew out of my work on abolition in the United States, and is in a way, and I'll just give an interesting little anecdote about its relationship. I've been, I mean, so I wear several hats. One of them is I'm a death penalty lawyer. I had moved down to Alabama when I just started being a practicing law in this country to represent people on death row, and spent a number of years there and continue to represent people, still do now. So I have a long history of working on issues of abolition, now not only the death penalty, but also prisons and policing. And I had really kind of was trying to formulate something about abolition democracy, which is a term that W.E.B. Du Bois developed in the context of abolishing slavery, and that Angela Davis built on in the context of abolishing prisons. And as I was working on that, in that space of abolition democracy, I kept on stumbling on the problem of kind of well, the heart of it was the idea of tearing down institutions of oppression, and of course replacing them with other institutions with forms of cooperation, basically. And cooperation plays such a big role in the discourse of abolition democracy, because it's only if those forms of cooperation are in place that one could even begin to imagine a social context that is able to survive, to thrive with the cooperative networks that would allow people housing, work, social support, etc., that would make possible forms of abolition. And so when I originally wrote the book, it was all about abolition democracy leading to cooperation. But as I continued to work on it, and as I continued to draft it and redraft it, I realized that no, actually, it's the cooperation that has to come first, in a way. It's only if we instantiate a rich and coherent political, economic, and social network of forms of cooperation, ranging from worker co-ops, consumer co-ops, producer co-ops, mutuals, credit unions, mutual aid, etc. It's only if we have that in place, in fact, that it would be possible to imagine how to displace our paradigm of punishment in the United States, or possibly in Canada, definitely in Western Europe as well. And so ultimately, the book was originally about abolition democracy. It ultimately became a book about what I call cooperation democracy, right? A different conception of democracy that is formulated entirely around the notion of cooperation. Now, and so one very big dimension of it, of course, is the social theory, which has to do with these questions of incarceration and other forms of the way in which the punishment paradigm plays out in this country particularly. And just a thought about that, just to motivate that. In New York City, where I am right now, we spend on one person for 1 year to incarcerate them at Rikers Island, which is the city jail, a horrible city jail here. It's called Rikers Island. I'm sure you're aware of it. We spend in New York City for one person for 1 year over $500,000. That's what it costs to incarcerate one person at Rikers. $521,000, more than $500,000. And it's just so clear that we are willing to invest. And of course, we're not spending that money on the persons. We're spending that money on prison labor, prison construction, services, catering, et cetera, food service, et cetera. I mean, to allow that institution. It's not as if we're actually investing the $500,000 into the person, but it's just so clear that we have this punishment paradigm in this country where that's how we deal with problems or issues or harm. We don't spend any of the money up front in forms of cooperation that would provide the support network that would support individuals. But once an individual is accused of harm, we're prepared to throw billions of dollars at them through the system. And so it's really shifting that from a punishment paradigm to a cooperation paradigm that is one of the three big dimensions of the book, which picks up Marc-André on where you started the conversation. But so let me just locate this. And again, I'm really thrilled to be here because actually here in New York and the United States, et cetera, I feel that we are much less versed and practiced at cooperation than you are in Canada. We are behind many others in this country in trying to think about worker cooperatives and consumer cooperatives and credit unions, even though we do have many of those here. The book tries to offer a vision for a post-capitalist society that's integrated and coherent and that governs on the basis of forms of cooperation rather than competition. So it's trying to develop something that is at the level of the economic, but also the social and the political justifications. The point is not simply to focus on important but identifiable, discrete economic cooperative ventures, such as producer co-ops or worker co-ops, but to integrate them into a whole economic system. Sustainability is what we talk about it, the words that are used, a sustainable economic regime. I feel as if, of course, many have been arguing for this for over centuries, but I do feel that we're at a special moment in history because of our interdependence, because of this human form of interdependence that has never existed before in human history, caused by global climate change, that we are at a particular juncture where we need to rethink the political justifications for cooperation and rethink where a kind of an integrated system, sustainable system of cooperation could go. Because the interdependence is really important here at a political level. Most of the political theories that gave birth to cooperatives and cooperative ventures, most of the underlying political theories are no longer really adequate to the task. So there were three really that gave birth to forms of cooperation: utopian socialist ideals in the 19th century, somewhat separatist ideals also in the 19th and 20th century, and evolutionary ideals. And you can think here, of course, of to the utopian socialists, of the great thinkers of cooperation, Charles Fourier and the Phalanstère, Robert Owen. But much of that work was more in the vein of philanthropy than actual creation of self-governing bodies of cooperatives. Robert Owen was brilliant and amazing work, but he was talking about enlightening his factories more so than creating democratically self-governed institutions with equal votes among workers. This is, we're still in the space of 500 orphans working in his factory under better conditions, to be sure. But it was a different space, and there weren't the same notions of interdependence at the time. The evolutionary arguments, and here, of course, Peter Kropotkin and his book Mutual Aid are extraordinarily important and influential, and continue to be vibrant, I think. But from my perspective today, feel a little bit too scientific, and I just don't think that we're going to be able to tranche ultimately the question of whether at the level of natural selection, what is the exact balance between cooperation and competition in terms of the survival of species. Certainly, it's obvious from his work and from all of the evolutionary work that there are certain species that thrive or could only survive on cooperation, as we said, and we see that well. We saw that well in his work. But what exactly is the proper balance? I don't think that we can tranche the scientific biological questions, and I don't think that that's where we would want to be resting from a political justificatory in a political justificatory sense. And the separatists also, I think there was a time where separatism would have been important. W.E.B. Du Bois was advocated for a separatist African-American society based on cooperatives in 1935, and I think that might have been appropriate at the time. But again, with our interdependence today, I think those arguments don't work anymore. And so one of the things that the book tries to do is to develop a political theory, which is a somewhat of a it's a deliberate and a chosen political theory that seeks to kind of concentrate and compound notions of cooperation into a regime, and that is open and inclusive. So and it tracks, of course, the principles of cooperatives that have been with us for over a century, the International Cooperatives Association principles: openness, inclusiveness, right? That you can't exclude, that everybody has one vote, that it's a one vote, one person, that it's democratic self-governance, but it's also in a way a decision, and it's also a decision about stakeholders, equality of stakeholders, care for all of the stakeholders, care for the environment. But it is decisionist in a way, not biological evolutionary, not necessarily utopian socialist, but decisionist. And I think that builds on the most kind of current way that we think in economic terms about inequality, particularly in the work of Thomas Piketty. So one thing is to rethink the justifications, the political justifications. Another dimension is to rethink the full integrated economic system that one could create by conjoining different forms of cooperation, worker co-ops with mutual insurance, and finding ways to kind of leverage them into a full economic system that could displace what we conventionally call capitalism, which is actually the word capitalism, I argue, is a bit of a misnomer because it places the emphasis on capital when in fact it's really the state that is what maintains a capitalist system. Instead of having a state down or a form of dirigisme that we do have in capitalist societies, the idea is to try and figure out a bottom up or a bottom down system that is integrated at an economic level. And then, of course, the third dimension in the book I've already mentioned and I started with, really, which was to displace the punitive paradigm with a cooperation paradigm, to try and figure out the ways in which, by putting together all of these different forms of cooperation, we could actually imagine a cooperation democracy that would be robust and that would sustain individuals, particularly when they're going through difficult times. So those are the three prongs of the analysis: the political justification, the economic regime, and the social theory. And ultimately, what it leads to really is this idea of a cooperation democracy, building on Du Bois's and Angela Davis's notion of abolition democracy. It's a different theory of democracy because it's not just a question of majority rule, right? It is a question of democratic self-determination throughout all aspects of our lives. And that is really important. That's crucial. I would say it's only by expanding the space of this self-determining democratic governance that we will learn to be fully democratic citizens in all of our living, in all of our dimensions of our lives, not just the electoral, as Marc-André was talking about earlier, right? But all of the dimensions, where we live, where we eat, or where we work, where our families are. And so that's the idea of the book. It closes it this way. I argue that there is the dawning of an age of cooperativism. A future of integrated cooperative projects and mutual collaborations is on the horizon. They will augur a more sustainable, equitable, democratic, and caring society that operates on the paradigm of cooperation. What's so great about this, of course, as I argue, is that there's no need to wait to realize this ambition. All of you are doing it, right? There's no need to wait for an election or for a regime change. There's no need to convince a majority of other people. Each of us, as you are doing, can determine or continue to work together to concentrate, leverage, and compound cooperation and watch cooperativism grow like a snowball rolling down a hill. The models of cooperation are at hand. The core values and principles are crystal clear. We can do this together now. And so that's really what I'm trying to do in the book, and raise these questions, many of which we've been debating and discussing for over a century now, but which I think need a gust of new wind to push us forward, I think, towards an ideal of cooperation democracy. So let me stop there, Marc-André. I know we want to have as much time as possible for the conversation. And thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. That was wonderful, wonderful overview, and it elicited many questions in my mind, in addition to the ones I prepared in advance. So I'm going to try and weave a little bit of what was coming to me as you were speaking, and then I want to make sure we leave a lot of time for breakout. So
Okay.
you mentioned a few things, Bernard, that really hit me and brought back memories of reading the book. One was, the Owenites. There was this kind of desire to be helpful, but it wasn't necessarily empowering, right? It wasn't necessarily kind of investing with people, decision-making capacity. And I'm reflecting on that because there's a tension in co-op land. We talk a lot about the social economy, the broader social economy, which encompasses nonprofit philanthropy kind of activities. And I'm kind of interested in your reflections on that, because there is a lot of energy in that space, right, as well. And what is kind of essential or important about this distinction between a co-op and a philanthropic organization? And maybe if I can just reflect on that, and I'm gonna weave in the second thought is this idea of a movement. We don't talk a lot about the cooperative movement anymore, but it seems to me that movement notion encompasses a lot of what you're trying to say. It's like if you unpack that idea, I think it brings into our minds this propensity to do something now, but to spread, to think interdependently, and to kind of really embrace something that's bigger than us. So those are two questions, but
Great.
related.
Yes, yes, totally related, and also very much on my mind. So I appreciate those questions. Now, in the book, I try to incorporate nonprofits actually into the cooperative space, and although and one of the things I'm trying to do in the book is also not diss anyone who is, who has good intentions and wants to be part of this space. There are a lot of nonprofits that are very not self-governing institutions that are very much based on a conventional corporate model of management. And in that sense, there, it's possible that if you think about the nonprofit world, it might be more akin to the corporate world than it is to the cooperative world. And for a lot of people who work in nonprofits that I support, that I contribute to, that I would work for if I had the chance, it's a hierarchy. It's a real hierarchy, and it's not determined by the members, right? On the other hand, there's something about nonprofits that is simpatico with cooperatives, and in general, I believe it has to do with the fact that it's for tasks that are not economically self-sustainable, right? I mean, I think, for instance, in this country, of the Legal Defense Fund, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which has done extraordinary work, and I've actually been there when I started my work, and they were doing great death penalty. They've done great work, but most of their work is not self-sustainable in the way in which a worker cooperative could be self-sustainable, or a way in which an insurance mutual could be self-sustainable, right? So I kind of view, and mutual aid also, I find, is in that category. It's not self-sustainable, I don't think. I mean, mutual aid requires another source of income in a way, or a source of revenue, or another it is parasitic. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's parasitic on other forms of economic exchange predominantly. I mean, one has to be sufficiently sustained oneself in order to be able to engage in forms of mutual aid, I think. But somehow they seem to be important and close. And so I've included nonprofits in here, as well as mutual aid, with the caveat, of course, that for the nonprofits, not all nonprofits are democratic and self-governing, but they could be, and so I think that's a great question, and I would say I'm actually. The reason I said it's also topical is right now I'm thinking, I mean, I have a center here, which is the Initiative for a Just Society, where we do mostly interventions in the criminal legal space. And I've been thinking about, well, what could I do it as what would it be it's part of the university, but I'm thinking, well, maybe it needs to be its own nonprofit, but I'm also thinking, well, maybe it needs to be a cooperative. But how would the cooperative work? So I'm actually struggling and working through these issues myself. So I thank you for putting your finger on this, and I hope we can talk more about it.
Absolutely. I'm going to now, Bernard, merci. I'm going to move us now into the breakout, and building on your call to action, if I can put it that way, right? We have this opportunity to take action. And I think one step in that process is to have these conversations and network and to see those interdependencies. So that's what this breakout is all about, in a sense. So we're going to break out. We're
Right.
going to congregate around a question that Bernard has posed to us, and Stan's going to put it in the chat. So the question is, what are the most compelling reasons or justifications or theories that bring you to cooperation? And they could be economic, political, social. I would say maybe even experiential. What can you? So the idea is to share and to kind of have that conversation as we do the breakout. If you don't know each other, introduce yourselves. Tell everyone else a bit about where you're from, why you're here today, and then engage with the conversation. And Stan, we'll break for about 15 minutes. One of you are going to be lucky and have Bernard in your breakout group, and we'll see where that lands. And we'll come back and have a plenary conversation for 15 minutes.
Great.
So Stan,
Thanks.
yep, thank
All
you.
right. So, okay.
Stan's going to send you all into a breakout room momentarily.
Okay, great. Great.
All right. Breakout rooms are starting right now.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. This is our plenary portion of the event, and we'll just throw it open for people who have questions. I know there was at least one from our group, but please put your hand up and we'll try to get to you.
Yeah, we had some great conversations in our group.
Stan, you're monitoring.
I see Samuel has his hand up, followed by Yusuf.
Okay, fantastic. Samuel, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask about a somewhat conspicuous absence from it. You shied away from using the word socialism without its prefix utopian, which generally designates its pre-political form. So I was wondering what you think about the relationship between co-ops and state power is, and how you see your model of cooperation democracy as distinct from the various struggles for socialism ongoing and throughout history.
Right. Thanks. That's a great question, and of course, a necessary piece of the conversation. What I try to argue in the book is that is for a form of an economic regime of cooperism that does not depend on the state, that is not state driven. Now, this doesn't mean it's necessarily anarchist and that there's no place for the state. I argue that actually, ultimately there has to be a decision maker to resolve disputes. There are always going to be disputes, and so there has to be a decision maker. And so that ultimately there's going to have to be a role for some kind of statist form of resolution for disagreements and legal disputes. But what I argue is that whatever form that takes, it should be dominated by people who are proven cooperativists, right? In other words, if it's some body, if it's some judicial body that resolves disputes, that the people on there have to have proven their ability to promote cooperative values and the cooperative principles. So it's not as if there is no role for the state, but I do argue that the democratic self-governance and all of these forms are either bottom up or bottom or bottom down, that they are at the bottom, that they are not driven by the state, and that the contrast here really is between a cooperative society and both a capitalist regime that is driven by the state. In other words, in the United States, we would not have capitalism if it were not for bailouts and for the promise of the federal backing of the banks, etc. So it is driven by the state, but also socialist regimes that are also driven by the state. Now, I'm not opposed to socialism and could imagine, I think that the first step is cooperism. And then after that, we would have to see what would come next in terms of property relations. But the first step is cooperism. So in that sense, that's why I'm not presenting it as a socialist project, because I do want to minimize the role of the state. Not eliminate it, I don't think it's possible, but minimize it.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Belmont.
thanks.
That's a meaty question and meaty response. I think I'm gonna go to Youssef now. I believe you were up on the roster. So go ahead, Youssef. Can I unmute yourself?
Hello,
Ask your
can you
question.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I went to a social entrepreneurship workshop yesterday, and the presenter said, I want to do good, but I also want to get my Ferrari. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is, he has started a bunch of businesses, but he also wants to make a good impact. But to me, this is anathema to the principles of, cooperative values. And like for him to it's almost like a superficial, uh, attempt at doing good as opposed to real impact. So and to add to that, like when I look at things like food banks and homeless shelters, I think they're unnecessary in the sense of, well, sorry, not unnecessary, but they're a clear indication that what we've been doing is not working. So to your point before, the government is not able to address this. So in the spirit of what you're talking about to the previous question, if we come together as a, with bottoms, level cooperatives, what can happen is there won't be a need for food banks and homeless shelters because all these, basic needs will be addressed. So my question is like one of the big things that I find when I talk is with different individuals is there seems to be a disconnect of what it truly means to live like the cooperative life, aligning the values with the actions. And so like in the implementation of that is more difficult than it looks. So like what advice do you give to those who are trying to, I will get into arguments, it doesn't make sense for you to get your Ferrari and make a good impact. It doesn't, it doesn't align.
Right.
So
Right.
Go ahead, Belmont.
Yeah. So I could hardly have said some of those things better than you said them. So you're entirely right that there are kind of often misalignments of values, and it's not as if the cooperation project necessarily means, well, it does in a way. It doesn't necessarily mean kind of like a form of radical equality, but it does have equality at its heart, right? I mean, it does have a notion of equality, which you see in, for instance, at a place like Mondragon, right? When everyone is familiar with Mondragon, right? The requirement that the pay disparities be less than 4.5 to 1 for the pay ratio at all of the underlying co-ops. That is a form of equality that is essential, I think, and that is the product of democratic self-governance. It does mean, of course, that no, we're not going to be driving Ferraris, and it's not a question of kind of taking away luxury goods. Maybe it is, but I mean, until Ferraris are available for everyone and everybody's driving a Ferrari, then I'll put my ass in a Ferrari. You know what I mean? But it's not. But obviously, there's these disjunctures that are troubling. You also mentioned the fact that there's a kind of a condition of we're in a condition of ungovernability right now, certainly in the United States. I mean, we're seeing that every day, every day. And so, yes, it's a requirement that we do this ourselves in a way. And we do this in a way that is, self-governing and has, as a result, forms of equality that would not be so that keep our values in line. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Bernard. We have time for one more quick question. Colin, can you go ahead and just be mindful of time? We have a constraint here.
Absolutely. I'll be brief. I wanted to go to sort of the other end of the spectrum, away from the state and looking at municipalities. And I know there are a growing number of municipalities that are looking at support and have been supporting cooperatives and worker cooperatives, both through educational resources and grants, but also looking at procurement and where purchasing is being done, also nonprofits looking at purchasing. So can you speak to what you see in terms of, as we transition from a society that's really not rooted in cooperatism to a society that is looking to make that kind of the forefront, as you proposed today, what role is there for municipal organization and local governance in helping to make that transition?
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's really important because the benefits of cooperation, I think, flow from its local rootedness, actually, which is one of the points, one of the important points. In other words, it's because of its local centricity that there are the environmental benefits, for instance, that are predominantly related to cooperation. It's because the people who are making the decisions are the workers themselves who are situated in their municipality or in their locality and deciding about what is going to affect them, that it contributes to addressing global climate change, that it contributes to addressing as well social cooperation networks, the social networks, right? So yeah, I mean, so it's because of that local focus, centricity, that I think municipalities obviously have to play a big role, because the cooperatives are interwoven with their locality. Certainly true when you think about a place like Cooperation Jackson, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and which is such an interesting experiment in kind of multi-dimensional forms of cooperation in Jackson, Mississippi, right? Which is obviously in a difficult relationship with the municipality, because it's the municipality that's been defaulting on all of its obligations, water, etc. But it is in a way taking over or trying to create a different municipality in itself. Okay, I know we're getting close to the end, but here's the point. In many of these contexts, cooperative ventures, I think, take the place of absentee landlords, whether that's the state or the municipality, like Jackson, Mississippi. I'm thinking, or nations, for instance, sea rescue in the Mediterranean. I'm running a series this year called Cooperism 1313 at my center. It's open if you'd like to join us. The next one's going to be on the Black Panthers, but the one after that is going to be on sea rescue in the Mediterranean. And it's all about how forms of mutual aid and cooperation replace an absent states in the Mediterranean. I think that's true for municipalities, but I think that's what cooperation is so brilliant at doing, at filling the space of those derelict institutions of governance, really. Thanks.
Well, no, that's a great place to end. I'm in the policy school. I think about these issues all the time, and that is the perspective that I like to bring to these conversations.
Great.
We're gonna close things up here. Thank you so much, Bernard, for sharing your time.
Thank you all.
Your wisdom. I just want to alert folks that our next co-op conversation is Wednesday, March 6th, and it's going to feature our very own Dr. Dion Poehler, Force of Nature. She's an associate professor at the Edwards School of Business at the University of Saskatchewan. She's also the chair in cooperative retailing system at our center. And she's going to be sharing some of her work around multi-year work around examining these rural-urban tensions in society. There's a big cooperative dimension here, and thinking about how cooperatives can help mend some of these gaps that are these challenges that are emerging. So thank you all for taking part in this talk today. We're going to have the recording up before long. We'll share it with everyone who signed up for today. And hopefully we'll see you again that first Wednesday in March. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming out.